Hi everyone, I'm Allie Buckman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to show you a technique today that is tubular herringbone. Tubular herringbone is done here in this example piece with 8 seed beads, and then I'm going to kind of explain how to increase your herringbone if you'd like to do that, as well as decorate so you don't see some of the thread. When you look at herringbone, it looks almost like a zipper from all angles, and this is going to be the most simplistic way to do the tubular herringbone stitch, which is going to be 2 rows of herringbone sitting right on top of one another. It almost looks like a cube. It has 4 beads kind of stacked right against, and if you look at the end, you can see all 4. It's actually those 2 rows, the 2 rows of 2 sitting right on top of one another. And then you do see a fair amount of the thread, so I'm going to go over how to hide that thread. And I have some videos coming up where I'm going to be using some of this technique for that tubular herringbone, so I wanted to do an introductory video so that way we can skip ahead in some of the others. A lot of times tubular items are hard to understand because there's always a step up involved. We'll go through that as we're designing or as we're creating and I'm showing you the stitch. But at its most simplistic form, again, we're going to do 2 rows of the herringbone stitch. You can do it as wide or as tubular as you would like. We have some other videos showing a spiral herringbone tubular stitch, as well as other herringbone stitches in that tubular or circular fashion. I have 4 different colors of beads here. This is just to really show the technique and the stitch itself. I have my red, my green, my purple, and my pink. They're just all sitting on the bead mat in order to show you each row what it looks like, as well as how to get started on this stitch. When things are done in a round or in a circle, it sometimes is confusing to keep track of which row you're working on, especially at the beginning of your project. It's a good idea to learn these techniques with beads that you're not working with a pattern, some that you have laying around, and just practice this stitch because you will get faster and it'll become a lot clearer to you once you learn the stitch. And then you can have fun using all kinds of different beads and bead styles and thicknesses to make your different tubular pieces. Tubular does move a little bit slower than the average straight because you're basically doing 1, 2, 3, 4 bracelets at a time depending on how wide you make it. Again, this simple stitch that I'm going to show you is just 2 herringbone wide. I have the 4 colors that I'm working with, and I have a size 10 needle. I'm doing this with 8 seed beads so you can see them, and again, that's why we're doing the different colors. You will see thread a fair amount. The smaller the bead, the less thread you will see when you are doing a tubular herringbone stitch. On my size 10 needle, I have about 20 inches of my green wildfire thread in the 0.006, and then I have a white 11 seed bead. This is going to be my stop bead to get me started and to help me to show exactly where the beginning of the project is. So again, we're not really doing a completed bracelet or necklace, although you can certainly go for it and complete one. It makes a great rope to put some beaded beads on and to slide pendants on, and it works up really quickly if you want that tubular shape. I prefer thickness-wise to go with 11 but I did do them here in 8s. So I have my stop bead on my project, and what I'm going to do is each row of my herringbone stitch I'm going to do with a different color to get started so you know how we're progressing and how we're stepping into previous rows. The herringbone stitch is going to be 2 herringbone wide, so we're going to do 2 right on top of one another. And my first stitch, I'm going to use my red beads. I'm going to put 4 beads onto my needle and let them drop down to that white stop bead. I'm going to take my needle and thread and go back through 3 of those beads with my needle going from my stop bead up towards the top end of my bead. That's going to create almost like a little box effect. We have 2 beads that are sitting right next to the stop beads and then 2 beads that are on the opposite side. Those are going to be our 2 rows of herringbone sitting right next to one another. Here's one row and here's the other, and then we're going to be doing the tubular shape to bring them together. I have my 4 beads on, and I've gone back through the first 3, and now I'm going to go in with my green beads and add 2 beads. Herringbone stitch is based on groups of 2 and adding 2 beads at a time, and then also sewing through 2 beads as you add them. I have my 2 green beads on my needle. I'm going to sew through my red bead on the other side, and I'm going to also sew through that first red bead that we added next to the stop bead and come out that bead. Pull the thread, and that's going to put those 2 green beads sitting right in the middle of the red bead. On the other side, because this is my second row, I'm going to pick up 2 more green beads and sew through the red bead. At the same time, I'm going to sew through the second red bead closest to my stop bead, so the one right next to the bead that my thread is coming out of. And I'm also going to step up. What that means is I'm going to sew through the red bead at the other side and also the green bead, the bead in row 2. So that first bead in row 2. Pull that tight, and that's going to be my first 2 rows. Right now it's laying flat. From now on, we're going to basically be bending it forward so that way we get that tubular shape. My third row, I'll pick up that periwinkle color, 2 beads go on. This time I'm not going to be sewing through that first row on this pass. I'm only going through the green beads. So the first time I'm adding beads, I'm only going through the previous row. I'm coming out of my green bead from the previous row. I add 2 of those periwinkle beads, and I'm sewing through a green bead towards the stop bead. I'm going to pick up the green bead on the other side and bring my needle out between the 2 green beads. When I pull now, you're going to see a little bit of thread exposed there. That's what's going to start to pull this into its tubular shape. If you want to with your fingers, you can even pinch your project, and that's going to keep it so that it starts to get that tube. Like I said, the beginning of tubular things are always a little bit confusing because you're going from a flat surface to making it actually 3-dimensional and rounded. On this other side here, I know that I need to create the next beads of my third row. I'm going to add 2 more of my purple beads, and I'm going to sew down my green beads. After I sew down my green beads and add those, I need to get in a position to add my fourth row, my pink beads. How I'm going to connect the 2 sides is I'm coming out my green bead, and I'm going to skip over to the other side to the green, and then step up to the last row that I did, those purple, and go through that purple bead as well. That's my third row. Going for my fourth row, and you can see I kind of rotate in my hand, I'm coming out the first purple bead that I added. I'm going to add 2 pink beads, and then I'm going to sew down the purple bead, and then I'm going to skip over to the other purple bead on the other row of herringbone. Sew up that. I'm ready to add 2 more pink beads for that fourth row. I'm going to sew down the purple bead on the other side. To complete that fourth row, I'm going to sew back through the purple bead, and then also get ready to add my fifth row by stepping up through the first bead that I added on that fourth row, so that pink bead. So there's rows 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can see at the sides of the herringbone, you're going to see a little bit of thread hanging out there in between and thread bridges. At the end of each row, give a nice pull. That's going to pull that thread in. In between your herringbone rows, you'll see the thread going in the opposite direction. So it's going to go under, over, under, over. And the herringbone rows will line up nicely with the beads sitting right next to one another, and then on the sides they'll line up next to one another as well. I'm going to do a couple more rows continuing that step up. So we have 2 red beads, go down the pink right next to the one that the thread's coming out of, go over to the second row of my herringbone and go up a pink, add 2 more reds. You can see I'm twisting it around the whole time I'm working with it, go down the pink, and then to finish up and to make myself able to add the next row, I'm going up the pink on the other side and out the red of the 5th row that I just added. Next is going to be our green, adding 2 beads at a time, sewing from the 1st red that I'm coming out of to the 2nd red, sewing up the next red, and adding my 2 greens. When I'm done adding those 2 greens there, I need to get ready to add my next row, so I'm going to skip over, go through the red bead and also through the 1st green bead that I added in this row. Coming over here to the other side, continuing on with our purple, add 2, sew through 2 beads, 1 green, 2 green, add 2 more purple, sew through my green, there's 1 green, sew through my 2nd green, and then also do a step up, sewing through the 1st bead that got added in the last row. As you can see, when you're working on it, it's going to look a little bit separated at the end. When you go in and you do your next stitch, that pulls the whole stitch together and it makes it easier to kind of see what's going on. But hopefully, after you get that start, you have that great idea in mind of how to keep going with that step up. Again, if you are having issues learning it, or it's a little bit tough for you, switch and make sure you're using more than one color. When you use one color, it makes a really, really pretty nice rope chain, and this herringbone has a great feel to it. It's nice and slinky, it moves quickly. I use it a lot. I actually just used it doing a flat herringbone in one of the videos that I just did on mini duos. So it's a great, wonderful, fast working stitch, even if you're doing it in this tubular shape with the 8/0 seed beads. But keep in mind to keep it going and to know which row you're going with. If you're just learning herringbone, use that difference in color. That will definitely help to keep it in track for where you're going. Here in this herringbone piece, what I did to show you was just added in 15/0 seed beads everywhere that I would see thread. So when you're looking at our sample piece, you see some thread bridges on each end. If you would like to cover up those thread bridges, I have some 15/0 sitting here, and all you're going to do is as you add your next row of beads, you're going to be picking up a 15/0 in between the 8/0 seed beads. When I come down one side of my herringbone, I pick up a 15 before I go back to add the second side of that row, adding a 15 between those 2 beads. When I'm on the side then, completing the row, I add a 15, complete the row by sewing up through the row before, or the row I'm working on, and then the row that I just added. That will add those turquoise beads in there. I'll show you again. So I'm coming out the top, I add an 8, a 15, and an 8. Ignore that 15 that's there and just concentrate on the 8s. You're never sewing back through the 15s. When I'm off to the side, I add a 15. And continue on with that pattern, adding the 15 in between. And this is advancing the pattern, so it's going from that simple pattern that you were doing at the start with those different kind of rainbow colors to doing the same thing, but just adding a 15/0 in the middle of them. So I'm coming out the top, I add my 8, 15, 8. So down the opposite side here. When you're on the opposite side, add a 15/0 just to cover up some thread. So up through to add the second row of this set. Add your 2 beads. Sew down. Before sewing back up that second bead, you add a 15 and step up the row. So it really does show you the versatility of the herringbone stitch. You can add very easily and make it wider to make it look like things are sitting on the sides. If I kept going, it would have stayed with that width. I was easily able to decrease that peyote or that herringbone stitch, which I'll show you again in another video, how to increase and decrease when you're working on tubular herringbone, which is what this is here. But I really want you guys to get that tubular herringbone with just that simple stitch using just the 2 rows, one on top of the other. You can increase the amount of rows that you want. If you want to do it 4 rows wide, you can do that, and it'll actually create more of that tubular effect. But you can play around with this stitch. Again, this is the most simplistic version of the tubular herringbone, creating it 2 wide and learning a good method to do that step up. If you do want it wider, instead of starting out with 2 beads, you're going to start out with 6 beads if you want to make it 3 herringbone wide. Start out with 8 beads if you want to make it 4 herringbone stitches wide, which is going to be right about this thickness here, is going to be 4 wide, since that's what this project there in the middle is. So again, most simplistic way of doing tubular herringbone for a nice easy chain that you can then come back and add a pendant to, or you can add a charm to if you're doing it with 11 O's. So you can change up, make your actual full rope out of just doing those 2 rows of herringbone, one on top of the other. A great way to learn the tubular herringbone stitch. If you want to look for any projects that are used with herringbone stitch, or you want to learn flat herringbone rather than tubular herringbone, we have a video for that as well. You can follow us on Facebook and also subscribe to this page in order to learn different techniques like this tubular herringbone, or actual projects like one that I just finished. So you can learn all different things on the YouTube channel, as well as product reviews and new updates on products that we're getting in. You can also subscribe to the channel so you get those regular updates and give us suggestions, interact with us on social media. We're happy to see what you guys have to say, what you want to learn, and things you want help with and to learn as well. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and practice one of these fun, easy stitch techniques of the tubular herringbone stitch.